Today on Face the Nation, two big stories in the news this week. Has the Gulf oil spill crisis finally come to an end? And is a national battle over same-sex marriage just beginning? The well has been shut off, and reports indicate that the oil is disappearing fast. Is it safe to say the Gulf crisis is over? We'll ask Retired Admiral Thad Allen, the administration's point man on the oil spill. Also this week, a federal judge overturned California's ban on same-sex marriages. Will the aftershocks of that ruling be felt throughout the rest of the country? We'll talk with David Boies, the attorney who won the California case, and Tony Perkins, head of the Family Research Council, a group that opposes same-sex marriage. Then we'll turn to Dan Balz of The Washington Post and CBS News chief legal correspondent Jan Crawford for some political and legal perspective on the case. But first, the Gulf oil crisis on Face the Nation.
Face the Nation with CBS News Chief Washington Correspondent Bob Schieffer. And now, substituting for Bob Schieffer, CBS News political analyst John Dickerson.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. Retired Admiral Thad Allen is in charge of the federal response in the Gulf. Welcome, Admiral. We are no longer seeing those pictures of that oil coming out of that well. When will it be done, shut and completely taken care of?
Well, this last week, as you know, we were able to statically kill the well from the top by putting cement down the pipe casing, and we pressure tested that the last 2 days, so that's holding. What we need to do now is come in through the bottom and fill what's called the annulus, the area between the casing and the well bore itself, and we're drilling very close to that right now, and that should happen later on this week.
And that's the relief well that we've heard so much about.
That's it.
Is the final process. Earlier in the week, there was a little bit of confusion. There was a message from BP that maybe the relief well might not be necessary. But it's necessary, it's happening. Is that right?
There was an inference early on there might have been some kind of an option on whether we're going to do this or not. That is patently not the case. I've discussed this with Bob Dudley. The relief well will finish.
Now, when the relief well is finished and we're no longer seeing those daily images of oil flowing, people in the region are worried that once that problem is taken care of, kind of the concern will disappear and they'll be left on their own. What do you say to that?
We're just moving to a different phase. Obviously, we're delighted there's not going to be a source for the oil, but if you're in Barataria Bay or the Chandelier Islands or Mississippi Sound or see the oil coming ashore on the beaches of Alabama and Florida, what you need to understand is we're going to keep cleaning it up. We've got a commitment to be there. BP is responsible. We are going to hold them accountable. And I would say this has been the largest environmental response in the history of this nation, and it will continue until the cleanup's done. And
what about your job? How much longer are you going to be on the case?
Well, I think certain conditions have to be met before we transition. It's going to be key. One thing is going to be key is Secretary Mabus's report on how to move to a larger recovery program for the Gulf and an organizational structure, and those discussions are going on right now.
But whose job will it be, if BP isn't holding up its end of the bargain, to get on the phone, as you did with Bob Dudley on this question of the relief well? Going forward, whose job will it be to make that phone call?
Well, first of all, on the relief, there will always be a federal on-scene coordinator to hold BP accountable. But as we move forward, there's other work to be done, including a natural resources damage assessment, looking at the larger socio-economic issues in the region. And I think Secretary Mabus's report on the follow-on structure will address a lot of things that go well beyond just the spill response itself that I'm responsible for.
You've had a lot of conversations with Bob Dudley, the new CEO of BP. Give us your sense. Do you trust him to take this going forward and all the responsibility that is still on BP's shoulders?
Well, you know, I don't hardly have an interview where they don't raise the word trust in BP in the same sentence. And what I tell everybody is that this is more of a requirement to cooperate, collaborate. We all have to be working on the same mission. We have to achieve the effects we're trying to achieve for the American people. And in that regard, I think we've been effective. And I think the tremendous amount of engineering that was done to control the source of the leak, all of this had to be brought in from other parts of the world and actually be designed. I think they've done a pretty good job at that.
So you think that it's a question of trust, but then there's also the question of competence. And in your dealings with them, you feel like they've been on the case. You haven't had to keep making these phone calls to get them back in line.
Well, as far as controlling the source of the well, industry owns the means of production, and we've brought a science team in there led by Secretary Chu. There's been tremendous oversight over every step of the way. We've consulted with other members of the industry, oil production industry. We've looked for independent validation by academicians and so forth. So it's more of an issue of how you bring everybody together, create unity of effort, but keep focusing on the effects you're trying to achieve.
One of the things the officials at BP have also said is that while they won't go back to this well itself, they might tap that reservoir, which has a lot of money inside of it for them. Is that appropriate for them to be thinking about that?
Well, frankly, that's a policy issue between BP and the Department of Interior. I'm focusing on the response right now, and that's something I would leave to them.
Okay, so the policy issue. What about a safety issue? Is it safe to go into that area again, based on what you've seen over the last several months?
Well, I think moving forward, we need to talk about the response framework for the Gulf. And as you know, there's a consortium of several oil companies have come together to talk about how might they put together a response framework that uses some of the technology that were successfully employed in this one. One of the challenges is the way they produce oil in the Gulf of Mexico is with wells that are on the bottom, with all the controls that are down there, including the blowout preventer. And the oil is all moved through pipelines. Some of the technology, including floating production platforms, shuttle tankers, and these vertical risers that are floating in the water, actually are technologies from the North Sea and off of Angola. And I think moving forward, we're going to have to develop a process that allows those technologies to be available if they're needed.
Also moving forward, have there been what lessons do you think have been learned for the next time there's a big disaster like this?
Well, I think if we look back and use this change of phases as a retrospective, I think there's some very positive things that have been done, but some things where we've had to adjust to things we did not expect to encounter. One of those were all the vessels of opportunity, at one point nearly 7,000. And how do you employ those, the command and control, the tracking? That actually led us to be able to improve our air surveillance, to be able to cue them better. And that actually was the result of an agreement we made with the 1st Air Force at Tyndall Air Force Base to take control of the airspace and coordinate all the air movement. So a lot of lessons learned moving forward, but a lot of this stuff had never been done before.
If you had to give BP a final grade on their performance, what would you say?
At the wellhead, I think they've done very well. What they are not good at, and it has not been part of their corporate competency or capacity in the past, is one-on-one transactions with individual citizens, and I think that's where the biggest gap in performance has been and where the most improvement needs to take place.
Okay, Admiral Thad Allen, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
And we'll be back in 1 minute. Joining us now to discuss the California ruling on same-sex marriage from San Francisco, David Boies, one of the lead attorneys for the plaintiffs, and Tony Perkins, the head of the Family Research Council. He is in Wichita Falls, Texas. Mr. Boies, I want to start with you. After the judge ruled in your favor, he put a stay on marriages going forward. I want to know, with so much legal fighting ahead on this issue, why should marriages be reinstated immediately?
I think the issue is not whether they ought to be reinstated immediately, but whether you ought to have marriage equality. I think that courts can differ in terms of whether this goes into effect immediately or after an appeal. I think the critical issue here is that what you have is a district court finding after a full trial. Everybody had an opportunity to be heard, an opinion that demonstrates that there is simply no basis whatsoever to continue discrimination against gay and lesbian citizens who want to marry.
Tony Perkins, you said this ruling, this decision left you speechless. What's your reaction going to be now?
Well, this is not without political parallel. I mean, you go back to the 1970s, and abortion was nowhere near the political issue that it is today when the court interjected itself in 1973 to this issue. And this issue is not going to go away. I think what you have is one judge who thinks he knows, and a district level judge, and an openly homosexual judge at that, who says he knows better than not only 7 million voters in the state of California, but voters in 30 states across the nation that have passed marriage amendments. This is far from over.
You mentioned this claim that he's openly homosexual. I'm not sure if that's in fact the case, but whether he is or isn't, what what bearing does that have on the case?
Well, that according to the San Francisco Chronicle, that he is openly homosexual, one of 2 federal judges. And I think, you know, had this guy been say an evangelical preacher in his past, there would have been cries for him to step down from this case. So I do think it has a bearing on the case. But
you think
this is not without precedent.
You think it's made his
ruling
ruling
skewed? Precedent. Well, I mean, you look at, he ignored a lot of the social science in his opinion. But in Nebraska in 2005, there was a similar ruling by another federal district level judge. It was overturned in the 8th Circuit unanimously. So there is certainly not only based upon the social empirical data that's out there, but on the legal basis, this is a flawed decision, and as I said, it's far from over.
David Boies, the one thing you mentioned, that the judge spent a great deal of time on the facts of the case here. What's your response to Mr. Perkins?
Well, it's easy to sit around and debate and throw around opinions, appeal to people's fear and prejudice, cite studies that either don't exist or don't say what you say they do. In a court of law, you've got to come in and you've got to support those opinions. You've got to stand up under oath in cross-examination. And what we saw at trial is that it's very easy for the people who want to deprive gay and lesbian citizens of the right to vote to make all sorts of statements in campaign literature or in debates where they can't be cross-examined. But when they come into court and they have to support those opinions and they have to defend those opinions under oath and cross-examination, those opinions just melt away. And that's what happened here. There simply wasn't any evidence. There weren't any of those studies. There weren't any empirical studies. That's just made up. That's junk science. And it's easy to say that on television, but a witness stand is a lonely place to lie. And when you come into court, you can't do that. And that's what we proved. We put fear and prejudice on trial, and fear and prejudice lost.
Mr. Perkins, I want to... Well, let me ask you just, the judge in this case said that the state has to find some kind of harm created by same-sex marriage. There has to be empirical evidence. Mr. Boies says, and the judge says, there was no evidence on that case. So what harm, give us some evidence in terms of the harm that would be created by allowing same-sex marriages.
Well, a lot of the discussion was about the issue of children and how children are impacted by this. This is so relatively new that there is not conclusive evidence to suggest that children who grow up with two moms or two dads fare as well as children who grow up with a mom and a dad. Now, we do have an abundance of evidence over the last 40 years from the social sciences that show us that public policy that has devalued marriage through laws such as no-fault divorce has truly impacted children and impacted the institution of marriage. And the judge, in his ruling, actually just ignored all of that and said that there is no evidence that any of the policy that's been adopted on no-fault divorce and other liberal-leaning policies has impacted marriage. And I think anybody with a half a brain can see that the policies that have been adopted in the last 40 years have impacted marriage and as a result have impacted the well-being of children.
Mr. Boies, let me ask you a question about where this case goes from here. There is the view among a lot of legal scholars...
Let me just respond.
Quickly, if you could.
Respond to that, okay? Okay, very quickly. Look, the judge did deal with it, and he pointed out, which is obvious, is that no-fault divorce doesn't have anything to do with the issue that's here. The empirical studies that do exist, and they're based on what's happened in Canada and Sweden and Spain and other countries and other states where you are able to have marriage equality, demonstrate that there is no harm. There are studies going back for 20 years that demonstrate this. The problem here is that unlike a court, people don't stick to the facts.
Okay, let me ask you on the question of the Supreme Court where this may end up one day. There's a view that the court doesn't like to get too far out in front of where the law is now. Isn't this a big leap for the Supreme Court to side with you, Mr. Boies, in this case?
It really isn't. Remember, unlike abortion, the court is not creating a new legal right. This is a right that has been well recognized for 100 years in terms of the right of individuals to marry. And all that's at issue here is, can the state of California take away that right depending on the sex of your intended partner? And that issue depends exactly on what you said before. Is there a rational basis for that distinction? Can you prove that it harms heterosexual marriage, children? Can you prove it harms anybody? Why do you make these people suffer if it doesn't help anybody? And what we proved at trial is that there simply isn't any basis, no evidence at all, to indicate that this has any harm to anybody. And indeed, all the evidence is to the contrary, that it makes those relationships more stable. Even the defendant's own witnesses admitted that there was no evidence of harm to heterosexual marriage or to children as a result of gay and lesbian marriage. Even the defendant's own experts admitted that there was great harm to to homosexual couples and the children they're raising by depriving them of the stability and love of marriage.
Mr. Perkins, I want to ask you about the Republican Party. Usually, often in cases like this, you hear Republican politicians jump to decry these kinds of rulings. It's been pretty muted so far. Why do you think that is?
Well, there'll be a resolution introduced in Congress this coming week when the House is pulled back in by Nancy Pelosi. But I want to address, David knows better than this. I mean, he's a constitutional lawyer. He knows that the findings of the court over the last 100 years have dealt with traditional marriage between a man and a woman. And the whole issue of civil rights that is drawn into this. The court in Brown versus Board of Education and the civil rights cases in the 50s and 60s were based upon constitutional amendments on the issue of racial equality, which were adopted by the states. That hasn't happened on same-sex marriage. This is an activist decision by a district-level court who is interjecting his view over the view of not only millions of Americans who have voted on this issue, but literally the history of the human race. So this is far from over, and we hope that sanity will reign when it does make its way to the United States Supreme Court.
Okay, Tony Perkins, thank you so much. David Boies, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
We'll be back with more on the same-sex marriage debate with our roundtable. We're back with more on same-sex marriage with Dan Balz of the Washington Post and our chief legal correspondent, Jan Crawford. Jan, I want to start with you and the question I asked David Boies. This is a big leap for the Supreme Court when it finally gets there, isn't it?
Well, David Boies said it was not, but clearly it is. I mean, they are asking the Supreme Court to set aside essentially the laws of 44 states. So that is an enormous stretch. Now, of course, the Supreme Court has taken up issues of gay rights in the past. Justice Kennedy, the key swing vote in 2003, said that states could not criminalize homosexual sex in the privacy of your bedroom. But that is an entirely different matter than saying there's a federal constitutional right to same-sex marriage.
In this case, Judge Walker quoted Anthony Kennedy 15 times or so. It was a letter to him, wasn't it? And is that going to work, writing directly to Kennedy, basically trying to use his own words to say, hey, you got to vote with me?
No, I mean, clearly this decision was written with an eye on appeal, and it's going to be appealed all the way up to the Supreme Court. The court is so narrowly divided right now on these key social issues. You've got your 4 liberals, your 4 conservatives, and then that man in the middle, Anthony Kennedy, who's kind of like this, human jump ball. And what they are asking Justice Kennedy to do in this case is not only, he's got to grab the ball, take it down the court, slam it in the basket, and shatter the backboard. This is something that Anthony Kennedy doesn't do. He's a very cautious justice. He doesn't like to get out ahead. Like I said, the same-sex ruling that he wrote in 2003, that struck down laws that criminalized homosexual sex. No one was enforcing these laws. This would change the law of the nation. They would be so far out ahead of public opinion, and that is why this case was controversial from the beginning. Remember, the traditional gay rights groups did not want David Boies and his conservative counterpart Ted Olson to file this case because they think the Supreme Court is not ready. They wanted to see more states pass laws allowing same-sex marriage and then take it to the court and not put that onus and that pressure on the Supreme Court. And I would not be so confident if I were David Boies.
Dan, let's talk about the politics of this. It does seem like from the Republican side, George Bush, when a Massachusetts Supreme Court ruled in favor of same-sex marriage, immediately he came out with a constitutional amendment to ban it. This time, pretty quiet from Republicans.
Yes, and I think that there's a good reason for that. In 2004, the Republicans needed to do everything they could to motivate their base. Their base this year is highly motivated. They don't need to do more to crank up the anger or the energy that's there on the right. The second, I think, and more important reason is they have very good issues to deal with in this midterm. The economy, the size and scope of government, debt and deficit. Those are issues that unify their entire coalition and also reach out to independents. To introduce in a significant and loud way same-sex marriage would threaten to pull away from that, pull that coalition apart.
Distract. Okay, if it's going to keep the Republicans quiet on this issue, what about the Democrats? How do they handle this?
Well, the Democrats are equally conflicted or quiet on this because while much of the Democratic base favors same-sex marriage, the truth is most elected officials, including President Obama, are opposed to it. And so there is conflict within their base. They don't want to really get into this at this point and stir things up. The president has stayed away from this issue for the most part, as have most other Democrats. So I don't think you're going to see Democrats try to leap to make this into an issue in the fall, even in some districts. I think where this will play is in some conservative districts, in some red states. Individual Republicans will use it, particularly through micro-targeting. They will reach to voters not with broad messaging, but by direct mail or phone calls, things like that.
Keep in mind, though, too, I mean, this is the first ruling by one federal judge, and it's going to be appealed. This case is going to get to the Supreme Court pretty close to 2012. So, you know, whether or not it's an issue in this year's midterm or not, it's going to be an issue in the presidential election. And President Obama is going to have to, I mean, what does he do?
And I think, as you said, the question is, public opinion is changing on this, and fairly dramatically over the last 4 or 5 years. But it's not at the point where there's majority opinion in a majority of states in favor of same-sex marriage. The court may end up ruling on this long before public opinion reaches to the conclusion a majority favor same-sex marriage.
Jan, I want to ask you about another legal issue, the same-sex cases about the 14th Amendment. There's also been some Republicans talking about the 14th Amendment in another context in terms of this automatic birthright citizenship in the United States. What's happening on that front?
Well, I had about an hour-long talk about this actually on Friday with Senator Lindsey Graham, and this is really kind of one component of what he sees and is pushing is some broader immigration reform. And he believes that it is a real problem that people are coming to this country illegally, having babies, and then they're automatically U.S. citizens. And then they kind of piggyback, the parents can piggyback on those kids to stay here in this country illegally. He has all these figures. There's been a 53% increase in births to foreign people who've come here to have their babies in the last 4 years alone. So this is a way he wants to look at the 14th Amendment and say, maybe it's time for us to rethink that. Remember, the 14th Amendment, which is sacrosanct, I think, to so many people, was passed to give citizenship rights to the freed slaves, because obviously the southern states weren't really going to be doing that unless the federal government stepped in. So he's saying it's time to rethink this when we're really looking at immigration reform as part of a broader package, securing the borders, giving a path to citizenship for the 12 million people who are here legally now, having some kind of worker ID card, and then also stopping this practice where people can come here illegally or not, have children here, and those children be U.S. citizens.
Dan, this is an issue Republicans want to talk about as opposed to the same-sex marriage.
Absolutely. I mean, I think what you're seeing is that almost all of the elements of the immigration debate that are being discussed now, public opinion tends to be on the side of where the Republicans stand. The Arizona immigration law. There are a lot of Democrats, particularly in the West, who were very unhappy that the Justice Department and the President decided to step in on that case, feeling that this was a moment that they didn't want to get into an issue like that the administration needed to stay focused on the economy. The 14th Amendment issue is another one. I mean, we are a long way away from any serious legislating on immigration reform. It died this year. It may come back next year, but we're a long way away from that. Nonetheless, this discussion is lively right now, and it is helping the Republicans.
Okay, Dan Balz, thanks so much. We're going to have to go, Jan. Thanks. And we'll be right back. That's all for today. Bob Schieffer will be back next week. I'm John Dickerson. Thanks for watching Face the Nation.
This broadcast was produced by CBS News, which is solely responsible for the selection of today's guests and topics. It originated in Washington, D.C.